Previously on Kangazang, Remote Possibilities. Jeff Spooner has left Earth with his best friend and barber, Ray Scump, who happens to be an alien from the planet Kangazang. They've been caught by a completely insane Amazonian queen and sent out into the deserts of Profania Alpha to retrieve the fabled universal remote control. With the help of a friendly tribe of space hoppers, they now have the all-powerful object, and now they need to return it to said queen in order to buy their freedom. What could possibly go wrong? Chapter 7. In and Out Quickly. The tall towers of the Slag Castle loomed over the desert plain. A pretty yet muscular lookout in her golden armour noticed two dusty, bedraggled figures trudging into view.
"Inform Her Majesty, the men have returned,"
she called, grabbing a long golden bugle trumpet. She blew a mighty blast which echoed out all around the kingdom. Inside the throne room, Queen Shelley, wigless and semi-dressed, was receiving a massage, manicure and pedicure simultaneously from her aides when she heard the siren. She got up, dismissed her servants, and strode over towards the nearest window, grabbing a red flowing wig on the way. The report was true. She was impressed to see the small dusty figures of Jeff and Ray approaching the city walls. They were alive, and more importantly, carrying a handbag, which could only mean that they had succeeded in their task. The universal remote was finally in her grasp. She allowed herself a smug grin.
"Oi, open the bleeding gates,"
she called. The city gates slowly rumbled open, allowing Ray and Jeff to enter. They were dusty, tired and bruised from their battle, but their spirits were high. Unfortunately for them, they'd still not been able to think of a way of escaping from the Slags and their domineering headcase of a queen, despite having been talking about it for hours during the trip. Jeff pointed over to the landing platforms upon which stood the Slag ships, and among them the Marshmallow Penguin. Both men sighed in despair.
"We've got to get to her somehow," said Jeff.
"Oh, it's hopeless, Jeff. Let's face it,"
whined Ray.
"Will you please stop saying that?"
retorted Jeff.
"Whatever happened to improvise until something miraculous happens?"
Ray seemed to sag all over.
"Oh, I don't know anymore. I'm never going to get home, am I? We've used up all our miracles, I think,"
he continued sorrowfully.
"Well, try and think of something, all right?"
said Jeff, noticing the guards beginning to pour out of the palace and head their way.
"Here comes the welcoming committee."
The metal-plated Amazons formed two lines, between which Jeff and Ray walked. At the end of the lines stood the Queen. Regal, scented, and mouth-wateringly attractive in her best red satin dress, she faced the travellers. Jeff noticed that she was wearing sparkling ruby lipstick to match her glittering locks. He grinned a little and nudged Ray with his elbow.
"Now there's a sight for sore eyes, eh?"
"Yes, lovely,"
replied Ray coldly. Jeff remembered something suddenly.
"Are you, not into women, Ray?"
Ray raised an eyebrow.
"What do you mean?"
"Well, doesn't she turn you on at all?"
asked Jeff, nodding in the direction of the Queen.
"Well, let me see. She's a bald, aggressive, evil tyrant, completely psychotic, and a cannibal to boot. Forgive me for being a little frigid, but no, she doesn't do anything for me."
Jeff raised his eyebrows.
"So you're not gay then?"
"No, Jeff. I just don't like the idea of fantasizing over my executioner, that's all. You must be suffering from Stockholm Syndrome."
Jeff was a little put out by his tone.
"Suit yourself. At least I'm going to die with a smile on my face."
He thought for a second.
"And I've never been to Stockholm anyway, so it can't be that."
The Queen greeted the two men with a big smile, but the smile looked insincere, almost sinister. It was the kind of smile one sees on air hostesses and speed cops.
"Hello, me old muckers,"
said Shelley.
"How's it going?"
she continued, looking both of them up and down. Jeff spoke first.
"Not bad, your fineness. Well, we both nearly died, but nothing too heavy, you know."
He was surprised to hear the amount of sarcasm in his tone, but he put it down to stress. Queen Shelley was also a little surprised.
"Never mind, eh? You're back now, ain't ya? Have you got a little prezzy for me then?"
Ray pulled a handbag off his shoulder and held it out.
"Yes, here you are. The universal remote. It's all yours. Can we go free now, like you promised?"
Shelley shot an arm out, making Jeff flinch wildly. She took the handbag with greed in her eyes and rummaged around for the object of her desires. Her face lit up with satisfaction and a certain amount of maniacal pleasure.
"Not until I test it, scamp."
Ray looked at Jeff and Jeff looked back at him. They seemed to be doomed all over again.
"Oi, guards,"
called the Queen.
"Take these two inside, clean them up and send them back to me in an hour. Off you go."
The guards did as they were instructed, and just like before, Ray and Jeff were pushed, cajoled and prodded all the way until they were back inside the castle. Queen Shelley walked back to her quarters, carefully holding the remote. She stared at it, thinking of all the things she could do now, trying to come to terms with the fact that she was now the most powerful being in the entire universe. Except perhaps for Bod. Underneath the throne room, Jeff and Ray were treated rather well this time around. They still had to undergo the repeated humiliation of the anti-parasite strobe rays, but they were both relieved and surprised to be presented with their own Earth clothing. It was, in fact, a set of sophisticated copies generated from the Royal Tailor's fabric fabricator, but for Jeff especially to be back in jeans, trainers and a t-shirt was a warm feeling that only served to convince him that their freedom was assured. The royal chef whipped up a couple of plates of food, but both Jeff and Ray declined to eat Hopper steaks and settled for green salads instead. The chef was none too pleased. As they sat at the wooden table to eat, Jeff tried to cheer Ray up, which was no mean feat, as Ray had descended into another silent mope, which generally meant that things, in his estimation anyway, were hopeless yet again. Jeff, too, considered the possibility of being double-crossed by the Queen, and wondered how they could retrieve the remote, escape the Queen, return to their ship, and escape the Profanian authorities. But hope springs eternal, as they say, and Jeff was just trying to remain optimistic, until hope decided to spring something opportunistic onto them at the right time. After dinner, Jeff and Ray were escorted back outside. They realized that they were being shown the way to the landing platform where they first arrived.
"See?" said Jeff excitedly. "She's keeping her end of the bargain. We're being set free."
Ray was still suspicious.
Don't count your chickens, Jeff. This mental monarch still holds a major grudge against my father, and by extension me. And by extension you too.
Clearly Ray was the realist in this situation. At the end of the thin platform sat their furry little spacecraft, the Marshmallow Penguin. Ray, despite his sour outlook, was pleased to see her looking undamaged. Maybe Jeff's optimism was justified. Standing at the front end of the ship was Queen Shelley and a handful of guards. She had changed once again, this time into a figure-hugging silver plastic catsuit which gleamed in the sunlight, topping off with a wig of straight golden hair. It was a truly awe-inspiring outfit, if a little 70s roller disco, and it reminded Jeff of his strangely compelling dream about the chrome robo-babe. Jeff and Ray approached her, each with a belly full of trepidation, unsure of whether this meant freedom or death.
"Hello, lads,"
called Shelley, smiling one of those "I know something you don't know" kind of smiles. Jeff thought he'd better start the conversation off on the right foot.
"What's your babe?"
The right foot was obviously in his mouth. The Queen dropped her smile like it was made of lead. She grabbed a golden staff from one of her guards and jabbed it into Jeff's ribs. He yelled out in pain as a few hundred volts zapped through him instantaneously. He fell to the floor like an unstrung marionette. Shelley walked up to Jeff and without a sound grabbed him by his left ear, which made him squeal in pain. Pulling him close but without loosening her grip, she snarled,
"Nobody, but nobody calls me babe."
She spat the last word out.
"But, on the other hand, you did help me out in a big way, so thanks muchly for that, Geoffrey boy."
Ray looked over to Jeff.
"Oh, well done, that man,"
he muttered, accompanied by a metric ton of sarcasm. Shelley let go of Jeff's ear and left him whimpering on the ground. She walked back over to her guard, who retrieved the electroprod staff and handed her what looked like a pink handbag. Opening the bag, she pulled out the universal remote. Jeff and Ray could only look on in semi-curiosity as she examined it.
"Right then,"
began the towering Amazon.
"Thanks to the success of your mission, I'm going to show you what this thing does, and why it's just made me the most powerful bird in the whole bleeding universe."
She'd prepared the speech earlier. Ray felt he had to at least try and reason with the power-mad ruler. He stepped forward gingerly.
"Your Majesty, I thought we had a deal. You know, we get you the remote, and in return, we get our freedom."
He was surprised to see that the Queen had allowed him to talk without interruption, and she seemed to have a pleasant, patient smile on her face as he did so.
"You're an intelligent woman,"
he patronized, making open-handed gestures to accentuate his vulnerability.
"And after all, you have the universal remote. What more could you possibly want from us?"
Ray had stopped pacing and gesticulating. He realized that he'd run out of paces and gesticulations. Still, the Queen looked uncharacteristically smiley. Then she quickly clouted him on the head with the remote, which Ray had to admit hurt. Quite a lot. While the lump was forming on his forehead, Ray thought it best to retreat. He shuffled backwards, still curled in a hunchback-like semi-bowing position. Jeff put a defensive arm around his friend's crouched shoulders.
"He's got a point, you know," spat Jeff in defiance. "What else do you need us for?"
Shelley raised a thin eyebrow at the tone. This weed of a man who first stood before her tremulous and fidgety was now imbued with a new strength, a new spirit. She liked it. It was a pity she'd have to kill him.
"You've both got a point, mate,"
she replied.
"I don't need you, either of you, but I do have a little matter of revenge to sort out, And seeing as old Scumpy here hasn't got a lot of hair to lose now, I think I might as well vaporise both of you and your poxy little spaceship.
Jeff and Ray gasped. This surely had to be the end of the road. After all, the Queen had the power to rearrange the atoms of the universe in the palm of her hand. Instinctively they stepped backwards, gritting their teeth as the Mad Monarch pointed the metallic controller directly at them. She pushed one of the buttons, grinning horribly. There was a click from the remote. A low, almost distant rumble. Then, like a sudden total eclipse of the sun, it went dark. Up above the landing platform, from out of the clouds, the furious anger descended, vibrating the air, the ground, and the teeth of everyone below. Jeff looked up. Was this supposed to be happening? Then he looked at the Queen. She was stabbing the buttons on the remote madly, screaming in anger. It hadn't worked at all. But whether it was providence or something miraculous, it was an opportunity, if nothing else. Grabbing Ray by the shoulder, Jeff raced towards the Queen and their spaceship. At that moment, the huge scarlet battleship above them opened fire on the palace, its bright blue beams sizzling into the stone towers with ease. Debris and fire rained down onto the platform, punching huge dents into the concrete. The Queen's guards scattered in every direction, leaving their leader like rats leaving the proverbial sinking ship. Ray ran over to the Marshmallow Penguin's side hatch and wrenched it open with both hands. He looked around and saw Jeff racing over to the insane with rage Queen, looking like he was going to do something stupid like rugby tackle her. Jeff rugby tackled her. The Queen yelled out in frustration and shock as Jeff's shoulder ploughed into her waist and knocked her off her feet. The universal remote flew out of her hand and skittered off across the platform. Up above, the underbelly of the battlecruiser opened up a number of sliding doors, and ominous, red armor-clad commandos abseiled down, blasting everything in sight. Some of the Slag guards joined the battle, firing back with their pulse rifles and throwing gold-plated spears. In the midst of the chaos, Jeff struggled and grappled with the Queen. He'd managed to climb onto her and hold her wrists for a brief moment, knowing that her impressive physical strength would soon kick in and he'd be pummeled into the ground. If there was any ground left, that is. It was beginning to fracture and split like an ice floe, and as he looked to his right, he could see the Penguin beginning to bounce and shake, with Ray hanging onto the door handle with all his strength. Jeff saw the enraged expression on the Queen's face. He was about to get hurt. Really, really badly. So, taking a deep breath, he stuffed his mouth onto hers and kissed her as hard and as passionately as he possibly could. 2 seconds of confusion later, Jeff pulled away. The kiss had served its purpose. The Queen was dazed, confused, and momentarily weakened. She even sighed a little sigh.
Gotta go, babe. Sorry,
said Jeff. He flung his arm out to grab one of the cattle prod sticks near him and jabbed it into her side, pressing the discharge button as hard as he could. Shelley shook and convulsed, trying to yell out, but in a second she was unconscious. Out cold, she flopped limply.
"Come on, Casanova!" screamed Ray. "We really have to go!"
Jeff jumped to his feet, scooping up the universal remote as he made for the spaceship's entrance. He dived in head first and rolled inside. Ray raced to the cockpit, punching controls to start the launch sequence without sitting down. Jeff pulled the hatch shut and the Marshmallow Penguin lifted off. It spun about and whizzed off the platform like a rat out of a drainpipe. Aboard the furious Anger, Overlord Kelvin noticed the escaping ship.
"Nobody leaves!" he commanded. "Get them!"
A gunner at the front of the ship swung a pair of evil-looking gun barrels around until they pointed at the ever-accelerating little ship.
"Fire!"
yelled Kelvin, clasping his hands together under his chin. The guns blazed, propelling 2 superheated balls of plasmic energy across the sky. One missed, but the other found its target, exploding across the stern of Ray's little craft, burning a hole through the outer layer of keratin and shorting out one of the propulsion systems.
"What the hell? We've been hit!"
yelled Jeff in terror. Ray had strapped himself in and was busy trying to pull the ship out of a spin and back into space.
"I know,"
he replied, equally terrified.
"It'll hold for now. Just get strapped in."
Jeff did as he was told. At that moment, the furious Anger was set upon by a fleet of Profanian fighter craft that had scrambled in to attack. They provided a welcome distraction, and it was just what Ray needed.
"Asto labisto, gravy,"
yelled Ray as he gunned his ship's damaged engines into overdrive. The airship pointed toward open space, and with a little bit of luck and a little prayer to Bod, it sped out into the stars, and with it, safety. Obscurity. End of Chapter 7.